Chapter 16. In the afternoon, I groped west along the hill. 30 or 40 feet from the last palm tree, I began to dig a grave for Timothy. I cleared the palm fronds, chunks of sea grape, pieces of wood, dead fish, fang coral, shells that the sea had thrown up. I marked out a space about 7 feet long and about 4 feet wide, and then I dug it with my hands. At first, I was angry with Timothy. I said to Stu-Cat, "Why did he leave us here?" Then as I dug, I had other thoughts. With his great back to the storm, taking the full punishment, he had made it possible for me to live. When my grandfather died, and my father said, "Philip, sometimes people die from just being very, very tired." And I think that's what happened to Timothy. I also think that had I been able to see, I might not be able to accept all of it. But strangely, the darkness separated me from everything. It was as if my blindness was protecting me from fear. So I buried Timothy, placing stones at the head of the grave to mark it. I didn't know what to say over the grave. I just said, "Thank you, Timothy." And then I turned my face to the sky and I said, "Take care of him, God. He was good to me." There didn't seem to be anything else left to say, so I just stood by his grave for a while. Then I felt my way back to the spot where our hut had been. And I located wood and piled around the base of the palm tree that had held our water keg and tin box. Both were to the lee side of the storm. It took me a long time to get the keg and the tin box to the ground, but I found it, and I found an opening that the water was still sweet, and there were matches wrapped in cellophane inside a tin box, and they were completely dry. But the 2 small bars of chocolate, that we had been saving for a feast, they were completely ruined. I had no taste for them anyways. Feeling if everywhere under my feet, I knew the K had been littered with debris. So I started cleaning up the camp area, or what was left of it. I piled the palm fronds, frayed by the wind, in one place, sticks and wet driftwood in another. With Stu-Cat constantly around, I stumbled over him several times. I worked until I felt it was near darkness. I found one lone coconut in the mass of sea grape and broken sticks. I opened it and ate the meat, offering a share to Stu-Cat, who didn't seem too interested. Then I made a bed of palm fronds and sprawled out, listening to the still angry sea as it tumbled around the damp K, and thinking, I must feed myself and Stu-Cat. I must rebuild the hut. I must build another signal fire down by the beach. Then I must spend the day listening for the sound of aircraft. I knew Timothy had already given up on a schooner entering the dangerous Devil's Mouth. I was certain that the sea had washed away Timothy's marker atop the coral reef, and I was almost quite certain my guide rope leading down to the beach had been snapped, and I had tangled by the storm. But now, for the first time, I fully understood why Timothy had been so carefully trained me to move around the island and the reef. The reef, I thought. How could I fish without any poles? They must have been washed away. Then I remembered Timothy saying that he would put them in a safe place. The trouble was, he forgot to tell me where. So I got up and began to run my hands over the palm fronds. On one of them, I touched a rope. I followed it around to the lee side with my fingers. And there they were, not 1, not 2, not 3, but at least a dozen lashed together. Each one had a barbed hook and a bolt thinker, and they were more part of his legacy that Timothy had left me. The sun came out strong in the morning, and I could feel it on my face. It began to dry the land towards noon. I heard the first cry of a bird. They were returning. By now I had taught myself to tell the time, very roughly, simply by turning my head towards the direct warmth of the sun. If the angle was almost overhead, I knew it was noon. And if it was low, then of course it was either early morning or late evening. There was so much to do that I hardly knew where to start. To get a campfire going, pile new wood for a signal fire, make another rain catchment for the water, keg and to have a mat of palm fronds to sleep on, then make a shelter of some kind. Fish the whole of the reef, inspect the palm to see if there any coconuts were left. I didn't think anything would be up there. I searched the whole island for discoveries of what the storm had deposited. It was enough for a week. And then I said to Stu Cat, I don't know how we'll get this all done, but something told me I must stay very busy and not think about myself. I accomplished a lot in 3 days, even putting a new edge on Timothy's knife by honing it on the coral. I jabbed it into the palm near the shelter so that I would always know where it was if I needed it. Without Timothy's eyes, I was finding that in my world, everything had a precise place and it had to be exactly where I put it. On the 5th day after the storm, I began to scour the island to find what had been cast up. It was exciting, and I knew that it would take a few weeks to accomplish. I had made another cane beginning on the east beach, and I felt my way back and forth, reaching down to touch everything that my cane struck, sometimes having to spend a long time trying to decide what it was as I held it in my hand. I found several large cans and used one of them to start the time can again, dropping 5 petals into it and reckoning that would start again the night of the storm. I discovered an old broom with a small wooden crate that would make a nice stool. I found a piece of canvas and I tried to think of ways to make pants out of it, but I had no needle and I had no thread. Other than that, I found many shells, some bodies of dead birds, pieces of cork, and chunks of sponge, but nothing I could really put to good use. It was on the 6th day after the storm, when I was exploring the South Beach, that I heard the birds. Stu Cat was with me as usual. He growled, and the first screeched, and then cries were angry. I guess that 7 or 8 of the birds might be in the air, so I stood listening to them, wondering what they were. Then I felt a beat of a wing against my face, then an angry cry, and a bird dived for me, and I lashed out with my cane. Wondering why they were attacking me, another dived down, screaming at me. His bill nipped the side of my head. For a moment, I was confused, not knowing whether to run for cover under the sea grape, or what was left of it, or try to fight them off with my cane. There seemed to be a lot of birds. Then one pecked my forehead sharply near my eyes. I felt blood running down my face, so I started to walk back towards camp, but it had taken no more than 3 or 4 steps when I tripped over a log, fell onto the sand. At the same time, I felt a sharp pain in the back of my head. I heard a raging screech of the bird soar up again. Then another bird dived at me. I heard Stu Cat snarling and felt him leap upon my back, his claws digging into my flesh. There was another wild screech, and then Stu Cat left my back, leaping into the air. His snarls had wounded the screams of the bird, filled the stillness of the quay. I could hear them battling in the sand. Then I heard the death caw of a bird. I lay still for a moment. Finally, I crawled up to where Stu Cat had his victim. I touched the body, and it was rigid, and his hair was still on edge. He was growling, low and muted. Then I touched the bird and found it had wasn't very large, but it actually was rather small. But I felt its beak, and it was very sharp. Slowly, Stu Cat began to relax. Wondering what had caused the birds to attack me, I felt around the sand. Soon my hand touched a warm shell. I couldn't blame the birds very much. I'd accidentally walked into their new nesting ground. They were fighting for survival after the storm, just like I was. I left Stu Cat to enjoy his unexpected meal, and I made my way slowly back to the camp.